Good evening. Welcome. I'm John, the event director at Literati Bookstore. We're pleased to welcome Congressman Eric Swalwell to talk about his new book, Endgame, the Impeachment of Donald J. Trump, with Congresswoman Debie Dingell of Michigan's 12th District. Some Zoom etiquette, you heard me as you entered. We just ask that you leave your video disabled for the remainder of the event. You are muted and will remain muted. We will have time for a Q&A at the end of the conversation, and you can send Q&A questions to me directly at any time. The public chat is closed, but I'll be in there to send links to purchase books, and you can also ask your Q&A questions through the Zoom chat function. A reminder, you can purchase Endgame to have shipped to your home from our bookshop page. I'll include a link in the chat. And you can also order the book for curbside pickup at Literati Bookstore's storefront. And you will also, when you do so, receive a signed bookplate from the Congressman. And I'll include a link to that in the chat as well. Literati also has thousands of titles available for curbside pickup. And you can find more information at our website, literatibookstore.com. In lieu of a book purchase, we'd also ask that you consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming, whether you'd like to think of that as this week's or this month's or this year's subscription to our, what will be probably a year's worth of virtual events. And you can make donations at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we simply thank you for your attendance this evening or this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are tuning in from. So without further ado, joining us this evening, Congresswoman Debie Dingell has served Michigan's 12th Congressional District since 2015. Graduate of the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, she is a founder and past chair of the National Women's Health Resource Center and the Children's Inn at the National Institute of Health. And Congressman Eric Swalwell grew up in California's East Bay. After earning undergraduate and law degrees at the University of Maryland, he served as a prosecutor in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. Elected to Congress in 2012 to represent the East Bay, he's now in his fourth term and serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Judiciary Committee. Please use your Zoom clap reaction functions to join me in welcoming the Congressman and Congresswoman to your living rooms.
Well, thank you so much, John, and thank you to Literati and to your customers and people supporting you during these tough times. We need bookstores, we miss bookstores, but thank you so much to my friend, my pal, someone I've long admired for her work in the U.S. Congress, Debie Dingell. We're on a nationwide virtual tour now and wanted to do an event in Michigan, and couldn't think of anyone that would be more just fitting and appropriate to talk about something that we both lived through. So Debie, thanks so much for doing this, and it's great to see you.
Eric, welcome to Ann Arbor, virtually as it may be. And I want to say how happy I am to be at the Literati Bookstore. And I want to know what it is, John, that every time I'm scheduled to do something there, something happens. So it either gets canceled or it becomes virtual. But and Eric, when you do come, and we're going to go visit this wonderful bookstore together, they're right next door to a great cupcake. So I'll buy you a cupcake too. But Eric, I really do admire everything that you've done. And what they didn't talk about is the fact that you also ran for president in the midst of all this. I know Eric, when he got married, when his wife had 2 babies, he ran for president and has been one of the most thoughtful young people in the Congress, and has been out there talking before you did any of this, before we knew we would be looking at the impeachment of the president, was trying to connect with young people throughout the country about the importance of being involved. How do you do it? I mean, is your wife ready to kill you half the time?
Well, Debie, you've been a good friend to her, and I think that's because you've seen both sides of the ledger, and it's really a true partnership. I wrote the book, actually, I wanted to contemporaneously capture what we were witnessing. I felt, although there was a lot going on, that there was a responsibility to tell my constituents and tell the country the stories of courage of the people who came forward, our colleagues who stepped up. But I had the support of my wife, who works full time. That's the only way we could do this. And in our household. She is the quote unquote breadwinner. She started as a front desk overnight assistant manager at a hotel and has moved her way up over the years, and told me that if we were going to make this work, she wanted to be able to still work too. And so it's challenging. And Debbie, every time I have to say no to an event that I really want to go to, my wife reminds me, she says, I think you're better at your job because you say no and you come home and you put, the family ahead of, some of the other things that we would all like to do. So it's only because of the support of my wife, Brittany, that we can do it. And, we love doing it just as you and John did, with your partnership.
So why did you decide to write a book now? What made you write Endgame?
I always wanted to write a book as a tribute to my dad, and he was a police chief in the Midwest. I was born in Iowa, and he came from California as a young police officer, took a police chief job, and found pretty quickly that he had kind of moved into a good old boy network where the mayor and some other crony council members wanted my dad to look the other way when they or their friends were getting into trouble. And so it all came to a head, and the mayor at a city council meeting, believe it or not, in 1986, where there wasn't social media, there wasn't cable news, etc. But at a public meeting, told my dad if he didn't make some of the cases against his friends go away, my dad would lose his job. And so my dad didn't flinch, he didn't back down. He wasn't going to bend to the mayor's will. And we packed our little family up and moved west. And my earliest lesson in life was that you have to be willing to lose your job to do what's right. And my dad did. And so always wanted to write that tribute. And as I was pounding that out, we came upon impeachment. And I saw these parallels of a young police chief standing up to a small town mayor, and what we were doing in Congress, trying to stand up to the president of the United States. And although the scale was different, I think the lesson is very much the same, that no one's above the law. We all have to follow the same rules. And so I wanted to tell the story of what my dad had done, but also what people like Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and Marie Yovanovitch and Fiona Hill had done, risking their own jobs to do what was right.
We saw the, I don't know the word to use, retirement, but except it really wasn't a retirement. Vindman was forced out. Talk about your impression of him and the courage that it took during this impeachment process.
Yeah, Debbie, if you remember, the first step was to bring them all in private, closed-door depositions, so we could really, in a close hold way, understand in a bipartisan deposition, what the case was, if there was any, before we went above ground, before the cameras and before the country. And I remember Vindman, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, coming in, in his uniform, nervous about, looking down this long conference room table of members of both sides of the aisle, looking at him, unsure of what he was going to say, and being tested. And he should be tested. This is a democracy, and you should have to answer tough questions. But he was insistent the whole way through that what he heard on that phone call on July 25 between our president and President Zelensky in Ukraine was just wrong, that you don't mix politics and the work in the Oval Office, and he felt a duty to report it. And he was unshakable below ground. He was unshakable above ground. I think what is unfortunate is that he and Fiona Hill and Tim Morrison all worked for John Bolton, and they came in, they raised their right hand, told the truth, and they saw their superior, John Bolton, not come in. And where are we this week? John Bolton continues to cash in on his book, and Vindman has now, lost his job. It seems like he's been punished for doing the right thing. But I think ultimately, he's redeemed in our country's history.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because your book's not the only book that's come out in the last couple of weeks. John Bolton's book has come out. I myself have read it in the last couple of weeks, and he said he didn't think that the investigation was wide enough. I have a lot of personal feelings about his book and where the hell was he 6 months ago or 10 months ago. But will you talk about that and what you think of the investment, what you think of his book, and what you think of John Bolton?
So his book is called In the Room Where It Happened, but he was nowhere near the room where it happened, because the room where it happened was the Ways and Means Committee room, where we heard public testimony from the people I just described. He chose not to honor the subpoena that we had sent over to him. And then once it looked like the Senate was going to acquit and Chairman Schiff gave him one last chance to submit an affidavit of what he had seen, he refused to do that. And so, I just like you, I'm pouring through what he's alleging now because we want to know what he's seen and what the president has done. But I don't think he deserves any sort of patriot or hero status because he was asked to come forward. And it's easy now to say, oh, you should have done, more. You should have looked at Turkey. You should have looked at China. But that's like the firefighter showing up to the building that's in rubble and ashes with his fire hose and fire truck and saying, hey guys, I'm here to help. Well, it's too late. When the building was burning, that's when we needed you, and you chose not to show up. So we'll look at, I know we are right now looking at what he's alleged, but not to redeem John Bolton, just to try and protect against further corruption until the end of this president's term.
I don't think John Bolton should be redeemable, but that's an editorial comment to the side and not Eric. Let me ask you a question, because I was very careful, very methodical. It's an Ann Arbor bookstore that is hosting this. Many people in Ann Arbor were very frustrated last summer, knew that the president should be impeached a year ago. I, by the way, did not come out until later because I felt like we needed the facts. And I probably was one of the people after Adam Schiff that the president was the most mad at. Still haven't quite figured that out, but we all remember the famous, he said, sort of went after me. But when did you know that we needed to impeach him? And when did you feel like the facts were there? And actually, I can't remember when you called for the exact timing.
And Debbie, you and I both, we serve on the leadership committee, we meet. And so for folks at Literati to understand this, every Monday or Tuesday when we fly in, before we vote on the floor, we go to Speaker Pelosi's conference room. And it's, just a conference room table, about 14 of us sit around the table, and the speaker gives each of us an equal voice. And she does this kind of around the horn, what's going on in your district. And Debbie, I don't think it betrays any competences to say that you, I think probably more than most of the people at that table, not only bring your own perspective, but you have a lot of friendships and relationships with Republican members and Republicans in your district that you're constantly reminding us, of just where the whole country is. And I do recall on impeachment, you just, really urging us to, move cautiously, but expeditiously, but bring the whole country along with us. And for me, because I was running for president at the time, and most of the candidates in the field had called for impeachment, but because I was a prosecutor, I didn't want to only call for it because others, had done it, and they did it for their own reasons. For me, though, it was in the summer, last summer, when the president sat down with George Stephanopoulos, and Stephanopoulos, I thought, lobbed him a pretty big softball, saying, okay, Mr. President, we've gone through the Russia investigation. Bob Mueller has issued his report. If you could do it all over again, and Russia offers you information on your opponent, or they try and help, do you take the help? And he said he would. And I couldn't believe it, because he was being given an out, and he essentially said he would take the country all the way, back through exactly the same way as he had done in 2016. And little did any of us know at the time, when George posed that question, that the president was already working with this scheme with Rudy Giuliani in Ukraine to have them investigate the Bidens to help him in his 2020 campaign. So that for me was the breaking point. And then, not too long later, we would learn, what had happened with President Zelensky.
And that was the point at which it was I knew we had to bring along, how I felt, and Eric is right. I think this country is too divided, and that we needed to bring the country along. We needed to have the facts. Well, let's just say that I'm on the president's top 10 list, but I don't care, because I think we did bring the facts along. And because of the way that we did it, I think a lot of people did pay attention. But, well, what was the most surreal moment that you witnessed in all of this? What was the most surreal, and what did you personally find sitting in those rooms, hearing the testimony? I was not on the Intelligence Committee as Eric, or Judiciary as Eric was. So he was part of hearing those initial testimonies. I was part of the whole Congress and leadership as we discussed this. What was surreal and what was the most disturbing out of what you heard that you can talk about?
Yeah, the day Marie Yovanovitch testified, I think, was one of the biggest days. So if you recall, she sits down, she's got a room, of hundreds of people, sitting behind her, every camera, focused on her, millions watching. And in the middle of her opening statement, because I've got my laptop in front of me and my phone in front of me, I start to see just a bunch of texts coming in of people sending me the president's tweet that he tweeted at her during the opening statement. And Schiff was about to begin his questioning, and I wasn't sure if he knew that this was happening. So I scribbled a note to Schiff of what the tweet had said and sent it over to him. He looked at the tweet, was pretty shaken by it, couldn't believe it. Maybe he should have, could believe it. And then he asked Ambassador Yovanovitch about the tweet and how it made her feel. And to just see that sinking feeling, where she had already talked about threats to her life, she had lost her job, there was a smear and clear campaign against her. And now she has the president tweeting at her, but she didn't flinch. She still told us, about the efforts to remove her. And what I'll never forget, Debbie, is that after she testified, she picks herself up, stands up, gavel bangs as the hearing's over, and the whole room erupts in applause. And to me, what was so stirring about that was, people were saying that what she did still mattered. And we went from that hearing, which was public for the cameras, for the country to see, immediately back down into the basement of the Capitol, 3 floors down in the Intelligence Committee room, to take the private deposition that evening of David Holmes, who we didn't know about 2 weeks before, but he had read Bill Taylor's account of what Bill Taylor was alleging the president was doing. And the Republicans in that back and forth deposition were saying to Bill Taylor, well, everything you know is hearsay. How do we believe you? So thousands of miles away in Kyiv, David Holmes reads this exchange, the transcript, and he says, well, if they think what Bill Taylor heard was hearsay, I actually heard the president shake down Gordon Sondland and ask him what was going on with the investigations. So Holmes raises his hand. He's on a flight to the U.S., and now we're interviewing him right after Yovanovitch. And so it was just an example of how witnesses beget witnesses, courage beget courage. And that was a real, I would say, a day that gave me a lot of hope about, what we would be able to do.
Can I ask you something that's been really bothering me for the last 2 weeks and ties back to some of these issues that you're talking about? What and how does it, we went through those impeachment hearings, what he did in Ukraine, and then we hear that Putin put a bounty on our soldiers fighting in Afghanistan on their lives, and the president knew about it and has done nothing about it. How do you react to that? And if we had known that last year,
yeah.
I mean, first of all, I know you agree with me that it's just one of the most outrageous things yet, and none of us understands his relationship with Putin. Can you talk about his relationship with Putin,
yeah.
how you react to that? And
Debbie, from the day that the president, as candidate Trump, stood on that stage at a press conference and said, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you'll find Hillary Clinton's emails. He was welcoming their help. What did they do? Hours later, they actually tried to hack her emails. Bob Mueller found that throughout the whole campaign, they planned the Trump team around receiving help from Russia and actually expected that Russia would deliver. But I think the challenge for us, and I laid this out in the book, was that the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin and the cost to the country was always kind of unknown, or at least immeasurable. That it was hard to measure, like, what did it mean to us at home? Like, what did it mean to me in my life in my job that Donald Trump was so close with Putin. But if what's alleged is true around Russia paying Taliban soldiers bounties for American lives, it's not immeasurable. The cost is, the precious blood of American soldiers. And I think that's where the everyday public will see, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, especially if you're a Blue Star mom, that the president is just unwilling to stand up to Vladimir Putin. And I don't want to speculate on the motives. I'll just tell you the evidence, which is that he has lied about his relationship with Russia. He has taken interpreter notes away for his one-on-one meetings with Russia. And in Helsinki, he agreed with Putin that Putin had nothing to do with interfering in the 2016 election. So he has consistently put Russia's interest above our own whenever they are in conflict. And for that, I do think most Americans are now seeing what the cost is to us in our everyday lives.
I want to pick up on that a little. I think you've had the opportunity, like I have innumerable times, to talk to Hillary Clinton, Secretary Clinton, following the election. And it is very clear, if you talk to her, she does believe that that is singularly the biggest factor that interfered with the 2016 elections, and that they are still very much a threat to us. And that the internet is something that we need to worry about. It's being manipulated. We don't know how much it's being manipulated, nor do we know how to respond to it. Do you think we need to be worried about Russia again in this election cycle?
Yes, and I think we need to hold social media companies in particular to much higher standards. I wrote legislation immediately after the 2016 campaign called Duty to Report that would put a duty to report on social media companies. Essentially, if they see interference on their platform, they have to tell the FBI. And as you recall, Debbie, and your committee has had Zuckerberg and others before it, they did not tell the FBI that campaign ads in the United States were being paid for with rubles. No one was telling or alerting the FBI. And so we've passed that legislation in the House. And if you recall, just last week, Marco Rubio stripped out of the Senate intelligence bill legislation that Mark Warner had put in, which essentially was modeling the duty to report that we had put in the House bill. And so we have to expect more from social media companies. And not to get too dark, but I think we have to talk about this because we can protect and inoculate against it. A lot of cyber experts have told me that their fear as far as Russia is not necessarily what they will do between now and election day. They continue to try and run disinformation campaigns. They're always going to do that. But the fear is that with a president who has implied that he's not going to accept the outcome of the election because he thinks mail-in balloting is fraudulent, that Russia would actually seize on the day after the election all the way up to the inauguration and try and amplify false stories around mail-in balloting to try and create more discord and chaos in the United States. And so I've been asking, we had Facebook testify to the Intel Committee a couple weeks ago, what are you going to do? And Facebook said they're already running red team exercises, basically planning for what Russia would do and how they could react, because we're really going to need them, to step up and not allow that on their platform during what could be very perilous times.
So I don't want to be dark like you don't either, but not only do I share that concern, I may be more skeptical even than you are of Facebook. Eric and I very much are both very concerned about this. He is on between the Energy and Commerce and his two committees. We are the committees of jurisdiction that are very much looking at this. And, we have it, your book. I guess I'll ask you about your book and then I may go to another subject of the time. But you call it Endgame, but it wasn't the Endgame. Impeachment didn't happen in the Senate. We're actually getting more evidence, not less evidence, more facts. I think I think people are on overload in this country. They don't know who to believe. They're tired of partisan bickering. COVID is got everybody in lockdown and the worlds are upside down and everybody wants to go back to normal, but we don't even know what normal is. What you called it Endgame?
Yeah.
What is the end game? Where are we going and why did you call it that?
So Endgame's, it's a Taylor Swift song. It's also the name of an Avengers movie, but it's a chess term. It's the final, moves before checkmate. And I propose that there's two possible end games, essentially, that we're in right now. One could be, a checkmate for democracy, and we evolve fully into Trumpism or an autocracy where we look more like Turkey and China and the Philippines and Russia, where the rule of law is thrown out and freedom of speech is only afforded to the president and people who speak favorably toward him. That is one possible endgame if we don't get it right at the ballot box. The other one is that we evolve from the 2017 Women's March, the March for Science, the Climate March, winning in Alabama with Doug Jones, to the midterm sweep that we had, to the 2019 wins in Kentucky and Virginia, the win in Oklahoma just last week on Medicaid expansion, and of course the win on impeaching him in the House and showing how corrupt that the president is. And we go to the ballot box in November, and that's where he's removed, and we redeem democracy. So there's two possible end games. I think the latter is the one that's going to prevail, but it certainly can't be taken for granted, and it's on all of us to make sure that it is the one that happens.
I agree with you. But let's talk about what's going on in this country right now, and how I do think that this president has been trying to divide us by fear and hatred. And with the death of George Floyd, has the national dialogue that we're witnessing, the systematic racism. And tell me what you're thinking about all of that and how that even fits into what this bigger picture has been the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I worked as a prosecutor in Oakland, and I was raised by a cop, and I have two little brothers who are police officers. And so I've seen the best of policing. I've seen, cops at their best, but I've also seen that while not all cops are bad, that there's too many exceptions right now, and that you are seeing individual and institutional tragedies repeat themselves over and over and over. And so what I've tried to do myself is bring that perspective of, here's where community policing works, here's where I've seen failures on the police department, and here's where I think that perspective can, by deferring especially to the Congressional Black Caucus, help make some of the reforms that are necessary. But Debbie, I went a couple weeks ago to a police lineup in my district, and they were about to go out to the protests in Oakland, California. And I told the officers, I said, I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you where we're at right now in our country. We're about to vote on this police reform bill. But I also want to tell you that this morning at a local church, I spoke to a black man in our area who told me that the only time he feels safe is twice a day: when he wakes up in his own home, and when he walks through the doors of his own home at the end of his shift. And when he's driving his car in his neighborhood, his nice car that he worked hard to pay for, his neighbors think that he stole it or that he's a drug dealer, but it's certainly nothing that he had earned. And he said that routinely he sees police officers pull behind him and run his plates to see if he has any warrants. And I told these officers as they were letting that sink in, I said, this person is a captain on your force. So if he feels like he's only safe in his own home, and he's a cop, and he's black in America, imagine how powerless and helpless so many black Americans feel if they're not in law enforcement. So you don't have to, go any farther than your own ranks and ask, other officers of color what they're experiencing. And I hope that more departments become more diverse, because I think that can go a long way. But tell me, what are you seeing in your district as far as, people going to the streets and their activism and what they hope to achieve out of this?
Well, the 12th district's a very diverse district, but Ann Arbor has had, and many of the people on this call are from Ann Arbor, we've had a number of marches, some really incredible gatherings and protests. I've spoken in the Diag several times at some of them. But but Ann Arbor knows how to make its feelings. They're advocates. They go, we go blue, and we have strong opinions and we make sure people know what they are. But the downrivers are, I mean, quite frankly, many of them voted for Donald Trump 4 years ago. But I've been to, not including what's happened in Ann Arbor, 17 protest vigils, community gatherings. And they've been organized by young people in communities that never do this. And some of them have been very, very moving. Allen Park and Lincoln Park, which you did visit. You've got staff that.
I've been to Allen Park, yeah.
Yeah, so we did walks there, and the police chief and the mayors. And quite frankly, the Allen Park police chief was one of the most moving speeches. I don't feel like I have to talk all the time in any of them either. Just being with the kids and listening is really important. But at the end of his talk, and he walked with everybody, he said there are 4 letters that can make a difference in what's going to happen to this country and this world. VOTE. And to not hear somebody like you and me, but to hear the police chief of Allen Park say that was very moving. But there have been some not good moments too. I mean, Taylor, a woman ran a car through us, and fortunately nobody is hurt. I think words, you and I are a tad more seasoned and have been called many names. I'm so used to somebody being mad at me and yelling at me, but some of the young people had never heard any of the words that were used. And it's a complicated time, but I think it's a very important time for national dialogue. And the other thing I would say is that this week, I live in Dearborn, and I went to a law enforcement event a couple of days ago, and the officers there were very honest about how they feel about being in law enforcement right now and how they're not appreciated and some of the things they've done. And Dearborn lost one of its own in the last couple of weeks, someone that was born from here, but was a police officer, a young police officer in Toledo with 2 young children, was shot and killed. And he was simply going up to a car that was stopped with a drunk driver. And he wrote I'm going to start to cry, a very moving letter about what it meant to serve. So I think we got to have very careful not careful, they got to be blunt. We got to get at the root problems, and it is a fact in life that Blacks are treated differently than a white is in law enforcement. But how do we have real conversations? How do we get at systematic racism? It's been in the midst of COVID, being careful. They call me Mama Dingell now because I yell at everybody before we do anything. Mask, distance, wash your hands. And it feels good. In Ipsy today, they went, Mama Dingell's here. But, it's been some real conversations.
And frankly, I think, Debbie, it takes a leader. And during our toughest times as a country, we've been fortunate that we've usually had a leader that when we have division, we have someone that pulls us together.
Brings us together.
And rudderless, things fall apart.
It's the truth. Oh, we're getting serious. So do we have questions? I could keep talking to him, but I don't want to be totally dominating because Eric and I talk all the time.
We do have a few questions. The first one is a particular meaty one. The late Michigan Representative John Dingell suggested in his memoir that it was time to abolish the Senate. How would you respond to him today?
I'm going to let Eric answer this because I agree with John Dingell.
I remember when he said that. I want to abolish the filibuster. I believe that has to go. We're going to win the Senate. I feel good about, we need 4 seats to win the Senate. We're ahead in Arizona, Colorado, Maine in polling and in fundraising of our candidates. And then going west to east, we're competitive right now in Alaska, in Montana, in Iowa, North Carolina, Texas, Georgia, Kentucky, South Carolina. So we're even looking at Oklahoma and Idaho as 2 places that are landing on the Senate map. So I think we're going to win the Senate, but we're not going to see action on climate, an issue that John Dingell worked very hard on. We're not going to see action on healthcare, another signature issue of Chairman Dingell, unless we get rid of the filibuster.
Thank you. And Debbie, I should add, I'm sorry that each time we schedule an event that you're involved in something happens, but I do promise that when we're all able to safely gather again, that we will take you down the street for some cupcakes on us. You have my word.
Thanks.
There's another question. The Congressman and Congresswoman mentioned interference, the threat of the president not accepting the results of the November election due to mail-in ballots. But we've also seen alarming voter suppression during primaries and state races during and because of the pandemic. How do we ensure people are able to reach the ballot box in November to have their voices heard?
Yeah, go ahead, Debbie.
Well, I mean, Eric's sitting on the committees, but we've been working very hard. HR 1 was one of the first bills that we passed in the Congress, but again, it's been stopped by the Senate that John Dingell did think should be eliminated. But we're trying to get additional dollars from the HEROES bill that we passed in the House more than 5 or 6 weeks ago now, that would do a number of things like bring direct money to our cities and our states, extend unemployment, but it would secure our elections. And we need to do that soon. We need to do it because we've been talking to our Secretary of States and they need those extra dollars even to print the ballots and to, et cetera. But what we're all doing individually as members is also, and Eric needs to talk about this, is working. Was on the phone today with Jocelyn Benson in Michigan, who's our Secretary of State, and calling all of our clerks, making sure that we have enough precincts. There are some sites that, because of COVID, are not going to be available for precinct sites. How do we not see some of the situations that we saw, say, in Kentucky of only one precinct open? I think members are trying to work with their partners at the state level to ensure that we're addressing those kinds of issues, making sure that there are enough people in the polls that day and then enough resources to count the ballots. And then we're very concerned about protecting the election process itself, making sure that there is not interference with the ballot box. So I think there are a lot of people, Republicans and Democrats, there are Republican secretaries of state that are working as hard as many of the Democratic secretary of states because they want to protect the integrity of these elections. Eric?
Yes, I agree. Passing HR 1, the For the People Act, is critical. Right now, I see it as there's a submarine mission, which is below the surface. We need to be in the courts and at the county registrar offices and in the states to make sure that people are not being purged, that polling places are open. But we have a concern that if we speak too publicly, and when Debbie or I or Speaker Pelosi are on television or being interviewed or at a rally, if we're leading with voter suppression as the top issue, that actually suppresses the vote. And that's what people who want to suppress the vote hope you do, is that single mom in Allen Park would have an hour to vote after her hard day at work and perhaps might look at it after she gets off of work and has to pick up her daughter, get her fed, get her to bed, and think, well, the Democrats keep saying that I'm not even going to be on the voter list, and maybe the Russians are going to be interfering, and maybe it's just not going to matter anyway. We don't want people to think that. So below the surface, I think we need to keep funding with the power of the purse, voter protection, keep going to court. But above surface, focus on the issue that most people care about first and foremost, which is healthcare. And if we can overwhelm the ballot box so that the outcome cannot be denied, then we can have the Senate, the White House, and the House and make those sweeping legislative voter protection acts.
There are two stories that I want to tell that are sort of talking about this in different ways. The first is that I was speaking at the Ford School about a year ago. It was a little earlier. It was probably May-ish or June-ish. And a group of protesters, we protest a lot in Ann Arbor, Eric, came in and were very upset, quite frankly, that the president would refuse to leave the White House, even if he lost. And how would we not get him to leave? And I was like, that would never happen. I mean, that's just not, this was prior to the intensity of the impeachment. And now I think many people are concerned about that. But I want to say that I think our military leaders who made a mistake walking across the street from Lafayette Park to St. John's Church have made it very clear that they support the independence and they support our democracy. I think there are many NGOs that are already working on this issue, and that there are many people in this country that are aware of the importance of protecting our democracy. And while a year ago I would have said that's ludicrous, and it is something that people are working on, and it needs to be many of the independent people, not those of us that are in a specific party, because they have integrity. And the second issue it's a totally different issue, but you made me think about this when you talked about voter suppression. Besides the issue of, and you know that our Secretary of State has made the decision in Michigan that they're mailing an absentee ballot application to every person, but you have to return that application to get the ballot. But there are pollsters that are using numbers that are absolutely ludicrous as to how up somebody is in the election. I'll stay nonpartisan as I have this discussion. And I also believe that's a suppression, and that people decided 4 years ago their vote didn't matter. And I now know people are already trying to say, oh, it's safe, it's over. Every vote matters, and nobody's vote doesn't matter that day. We lost an election because too many people across the country didn't think that their vote could matter. I was one of those people that kept saying Donald Trump could win Michigan, and everybody thought it was crazy 4 years ago.
You did.
Well, I told all of my colleagues, everybody there thought I was crazy too. But I listened to people. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And we haven't been out. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a people person. On a normal week, I'm at 14 events on a Saturday. And we can't do that right now. But I am going back out a little. I went to, some veterans events on Saturday, went to a Black Lives Matter event on the 4th, did some other things. Trump voters are still there. Some of them talk to me pretty openly and honestly. Your vote matters, and every vote's going to matter. And we need you to know that it matters, and you cannot believe what people necessarily are saying. And I can tell you, neither candidate's up 16 points. This is going to be a competitive state right until the end. I had to make those 2 different points.
No, well said.
There's another question here. Fauci said he hasn't briefed the president in months. What is being done and what can be done at the federal level to address this crisis for people both in their health and in their economic conditions, despite obstinacy from the White House?
We have funded, in the CARES Act and the HEROES Act, the testing, the tracing, the treatment, and preparing for a vaccine. We've put in hazard pay for frontline workers on the economic side, because there's no denying this is really hard, especially I know the auto workers, just the sacrifice they've made in Michigan. There's an economic impact. And so funding, the Paycheck Protection Plan, funding the extension of unemployment, we've done that, and it needs an audience now in the Senate. But I have to say, what is frustrating for me is that it's almost as if the whole world was given a final exam. Everyone got the same questions. We were actually probably better prepared than most, and we're failing. And it's just so crushing to be an American and to see how poorly we have handled this crisis. And going back to what I told Debbie earlier, leadership starts at the top. And we didn't have, a national policy on masks. We didn't have, a national policy on sheltering in place. And so I feel like Michigan and California, 2 states that were the earliest to shelter in place, 2 states that did everything you were supposed to do, followed the experts. Now we're almost arriving, at least in California, at the exact same place as Florida and Arizona. And people have asked me, well, if you guys sheltered in place, didn't get you anywhere. But no, what had happened is our caseload was very low in California up until about mid to end of May. And people in California started to see the lowest common denominator around us, Arizona, Florida, Texas, as far as sheltering in place. They were opening up, and people are people. They got anxious and eager to get out, and looser in the way that we all protected each other. And that's because we didn't have a national policy, and we're just failing. And I hate to see us fail. And it's going to take a leader to pick us up, distribute a vaccine, pick up the economic pieces, have a bridge to recovery, and then rebuild an economy that is more just and has more opportunity. But right now, it is just, to be honest, frustrating to see it in our country.
It's more than that. I totally agree with everything Eric said. While we were sitting here, the news alert came out that today was the highest day of the number of positive cases of COVID in the world, and the United States is leading for the highest number of cases in the world. Here's this fact. This is just a fact. If the president would put a damn mask on, he would save thousands of lives. Just the act of his not wearing a mask enables multiple people just to not wear it. They don't believe it. I was marching on the Independence Day, and I'm not going to tell you who it was, but it was a civic leader who said, I just don't believe this. And, Tony, I've known Tony Fauci for 40 years, and Eric's probably known him a long time too. We go to church together when I'm in Washington. That's how long we've known each other. But the one thing I have to say about Tony is he's not afraid to speak his mind. And he has told the truth from the very beginning. The fact of the matter is we have been behind on the mask policy. We are now in a crisis again that we don't have enough PPE equipment. We're in a crisis again that we don't have enough tests. The supplies for the tests are becoming short again. States like Texas, as you were talking about, Eric, where the governor was sort of mocking California and Michigan when our governors did stay-at-home orders, now have stay-at-home orders and have fines connected with their mask wearing. Today, our governor has associated a fine with people not wearing their masks. She doesn't want to have to do that, but if she has to. And Michigan is not climbed as fast as California has back up, but our numbers have steadily been going up again for the last 2 weeks, and our governor's not afraid to do a stay-at-home order again. And I want to know what's happening to the Ho task force. The woman who, Dr. Burke says, I haven't seen her. Have you seen her in weeks? Tony's not afraid to be seen, to be heard. And I know that there are days the president would dearly not to, but we need to listen to the science, the experts. The facts need to drive, the science needs to drive what we do in this country. And our goal needs to be to save lives, keep people safe. And everything I do, I finish or begin with, wear your mask, keep your physical distance, and wash your hands a lot. That is how we keep ourselves safe.
Thank you. There's just a couple more questions. One is, what can folks do in addition to voting for president in November? What can folks do down ballot in a time where in-person volunteering is more difficult? To support down ballot candidate.
Yeah, Debbie, I'll let you speak to Michigan if you want to talk about just vote.
Well, the first thing, and I mentioned it briefly before, is that the Secretary of State is mailing everybody an absentee ballot application, and we need you to fill it out. And you can safely vote at home. That's the easiest thing that everybody can do, is vote at home by filling that out and then returning your ballot. But we're learning how to campaign virtually. So we have volunteer banks every weekend. We have them almost every night now, where we're contacting voters, reminding them of the importance of voting, talking to them about the issues and why that matters. As we get closer to primary day and as we get closer to election day, we will be doing walks. We need people to host house parties and virtual forums, and you just have to think differently. But we need everybody, and if you want to get involved, there's a role to play, from putting a sign in your house to talking to every one of your neighbors. So we need you, and we need you involved. Eric?
So Debbie, I've been working on, and you alluded in the beginning, trying to involve young people. And young people ask me all the time, and my interns always ask when they leave the office, well, I want to be in Congress one day. How do I get there? And what I've learned is that if you run on issues, you'll find the office, rather than just finding offices and saying, I to get to governor, I have to do this and this and this. I think you'll be disappointed because you may not hit one of the waypoints, and you may be so disappointed you don't stay in public service. And so what I found is that if you find the issues you care about, you're going to find the office. And so, to young people, I say, pick a couple issues and find, ways to serve it. It may not be public office. It could be, I started on an arts commission and then a planning commission and then a city council. But it was always, and I ran for president, as you alluded to, Debbie, because of the issue of gun violence. And when I'm asked if I'll run again, I ran because I want that issue to have, a force in our country, but I'm going to continue to serve the issues and let that drive me to the office. And my wife, Brittany, is here to say hi.
Hi, Brittany.
Hey, Debbie.
Oh.
And that's Cricket. She said hi.
We've got one more question, and it's our favorite question at Literati
Of course.
Bookstore. And it's for both of you. What are you reading right now? What do you recommend to read?
So I'll give you one that I finished recently called All the Shah's Men. And it's a lesson in the U.S. government reaching too far into other countries' democracies, which we don't like right now when Russia is trying to do that with us. But it's about the CIA with Mossadegh in the 1950s in Iran, overthrowing a democratically elected president. And it was led by Kermit Roosevelt, the great grandson of Theodore Roosevelt. So it's a true story, but it's a good tale as we think about what's happened to our democracy and what we don't want to do. The other is called The Impossible Fortress. It's by Jason Rekulak. It's a teen love letter to the 80s. And so for me, it's just, it brings up growing up in the 80s and, the books you read, the culture you experienced. It's kind of a teen love story, but, written, I think, in a pretty mature way by, a millennial that just, it's nice to have a little nostalgia, I guess. That's fiction.
Well, I love novels. I love spy thrillers, and I read several books a week, I'll admit it. But one of the good books that I've read in the last couple of weeks that I strongly recommend is David Ignatius, who's a fabulous writer, and why they are spy thrillers. You really learn a lot about what's actually going on in the world. And his new book, The Paladin, is very good. And James Patterson has a couple of outstanding books out too that I've read this week, The Summer House. So I just I go to bed at night and read to lose myself. So I highly recommend a good spy book. And
hey, well, Debbie, I'm gonna tell you, I'm finishing on audio, Russians Among Us. That's about the illegals, the ghost story of the 10-year program the Russians had inside the United States, which kind of, as you listen to it, foreshadowed what they would ultimately do in 2016. But I'm the same way. And then Red Sparrow, I know it was a movie, but before it was a movie, Jason Matthews wrote a really good, fiction novel called Red Sparrow.
He did, and it's good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for both for those recommendations.
Thank you, guys.
You can find them on literatibookstore.com. My colleague is putting them in the chat right now. And also, if you enjoy listening to audiobooks, you can purchase audiobooks and still support Literati Bookstore by using Libro FM. There's more information on that at literatibookstore.com. Congressman Swalwell, Congresswoman Dingell, thank you so much for being here.
And I just want to say, John, thank you again. And to Ann Arbor, you're so lucky to have Debie Dingell as your member of Congress. And I'm so lucky to call her a friend and colleague.
Well, I'm lucky to call Eric my friend. And we want you to come to Michigan when we're cheering loud, go blue in the same room.
That's right. And then I promise that we will take you, Literati, we'll take you all out for cupcakes directly after. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you for all of us who tuned in. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe and wear your masks.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Thank you.